time to talk about commodity number 2, which is iron ore, which was the cynosure of all eyes, all the analysts and people who closely track the commodity space. So let's talk a bit about that. Let's welcome on board Alistair Ramsay, the head of research at Fastmarkets. Alistair, hi and welcome on board. Just want to get in your perspective of what is the impact seen on the disruption that has been raised by the top 3 producers of iron ore. There's an issue with respect to Australia, Brazil, even China has seen a heightened demand. Could prices move up further over the near to medium term, and is the supply expected to also get tightened further?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, we've had 2 big supply side developments this year, and a terrible disaster in Brazil, and most recently Cyclone Veronica in Australia, which disrupted some tonnage from Western Australian mining companies, and that's in combination led to quite a large price rise in the iron ore benchmarks that we track in recent weeks. I think fines briefly hit over $90 a ton earlier this week. I think a lot of people who trade iron ore are concerned that the supply disruptions seen so far aren't even having their direct impact yet. In some cases, you see the buying industry, the steel makers have been stocking up of material, notably of Brazilian origin, higher value iron ores. And in that case, we don't actually see fundamentally at the moment too much of an obvious problem in the iron ore industry. Stocks are up. Demand is not particularly strong because of the seasonal nature of it. But we do know that demand is more than likely to accelerate strongly through the next few months.
Okay, so what is the range exactly that you're expecting the prices to stabilize at? Because the demand clearly looks like it's going to go up. And given the constraints in terms of production and supply, how do other metals also stand to be impacted by this development?
The iron ore price of recent years, though, has been in a concertina, if you like, of a high and low level, largely determined by the strength of the downstream industries that you mentioned. So I'm speaking specifically about iron making and steel making in China and farther afield. So in recent times, there's been a fabulous resurgence in production of those downstream products, those iron-based steels, which are in high demand in China and elsewhere. And that's pulled up really the value of iron ore as we see it in recent years. Now, most recently, the steel prices, as I'm sure you're aware, have come down quite a lot. There's been some fairly significant corrections through the weaker seasonal periods of last year, and of course the macroeconomic uncertainty surrounding, China, US trade wars, etc. So we're still in that phase, we're not quite out of it yet, to see whether the prices of steel, and more importantly, I guess, the profits of the steel makers can really surge.
Now that brings me to my next question. After falling sharply at the end of last year, Chinese prices have started to stabilize. This is, is that an incentive enough to provide an incentive to increase production?
Time will tell. I mean, normally we see the production response to strong demand rather than merely price dynamics. Margins are going up a little bit at the moment for the key products such as rebar and hot rolled coil, which is where the Chinese make most of their money. They don't really make much money on different forms of steel, higher value steels. The money making is in those core products, and those were the products which really struggled, as you say, late last year and into the early part. The fact that they're recovering, great question you make. Is that going to stimulate production? It's a funny thing, though, because in the first couple of months of this year, the data that we have, output of rebar has already been surging on a year-on-year basis. You know, it's been growing by 10%, whereas steel's growing by 9%. So I don't think the higher margins themselves or the stable prices is going to propel production any more than it is.
Okay, Alistair, great chatting with you and getting in your perspective on iron ore and the outlook forward. Thank you so much for joining in.